Okay. Fire financial independence. Retire early. It's, well, it's everywhere these days, right?
Yeah, you see it all over the place.
Seems like everyone's talking about ditching their jobs, the whole 9 to 5 thing, and then just living off their investments. But is it actually as good as it sounds? And, could it work for like a regular person?
That's what we're really diving into today.
We're gonna figure out if this whole fire thing is like fact or fiction.
Yeah, is it really possible or is it just like a fantasy?
And if it is possible, how do you actually get started? Is it something you could actually do?
Right, like is this something that's attainable for you?
So, to jump right in, when we say fire, what are we actually talking about?
Well, at its core, the FIRE movement is all about achieving financial freedom. It's about reaching a point where you're not tethered to a job just to pay the bills.
So, you're saying it's not just about retiring early, it's about having choices.
Exactly. It's about having the autonomy to design your own life, whether that means early retirement, starting a business, traveling the world, or just spending more time with loved ones.
Okay, I can get behind that. That freedom to choose, that's really appealing. But let's be real for a second. Isn't this whole fire thing just a pipe dream for like super wealthy people? You know, the ones with the six-figure salaries and trust funds?
That's a common misconception, and actually one of the sources we have really challenges that assumption.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more.
It's a blog post by this guy, he calls himself Average Joe, who actually achieved FIRE. And he really emphasizes that it's not about how much money you earn,
Okay.
it's about how much you keep.
So it's more about being smart with your money than like winning the lottery or something.
Exactly. He talks about how he was able to retire in his early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And get this, he did it by embracing a frugal lifestyle, diligently tracking all his spending every penny, and then consistently investing a huge chunk of his income,
Huge check. Like how much are we talking?
something like 70%.
70. Okay, that's pretty intense.
It's a lot, even for someone who, enjoys talking about finances.
Yeah, no kidding. So
Yeah.
is that level of like aggressive saving, is that really necessary for everyone who wants to pursue fire?
That's the interesting thing about FIRE. It's not one size fits all. Our sources actually highlight that there are all these different approaches to FIRE, like lean FIRE, which is more for minimalists.
No.
And then you've got fat FIRE, which is more for people who want a more, shall we say, comfortable early retirement.
So there's some flexibility. I like it. But you mentioned investing, and that's something I definitely want to dig into more. What does investing wisely even mean, in the context of fire?
It's a great question. And honestly, it's super important
Right.
because you can't just like throw your money into any random investment and hope for the best.
Definitely not. So are we talking about risky bets on the stock market? Or is it more about slow and steady wins the race?
Most people in the FIRE movement, they're all about that slow and steady approach. They focus on building wealth gradually over the long term.
So no get-rich-quick schemes.
Definitely not. A lot of the sources we looked at, they all talked about index funds.
Index funds. Okay.
And actually, they're really popular with FIRE investors.
Why is that?
Well, index funds are basically these baskets of stocks that track specific market indexes, like the S&P 500, for example.
So instead of trying to pick individual stocks, you're spreading your risk across a whole bunch of companies.
Exactly, and that's generally considered a much less risky approach.
That makes sense. But I will say, for someone who's like completely new to investing, even index funds can seem kind of intimidating.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
That's why starting with the basics is so important. There are tons of resources out there.
Oh, like what?
You've got online tutorials, robo-advisors. They can all help you get started with investing, even if you don't have a lot of money or, a finance degree.
So you don't have to be a Wall Street hotshot to get started with fire.
Absolutely not. One of the key takeaways from pretty much all of our sources is that FIRE is attainable for anyone who's willing to put in the effort. It's about being willing to learn, to save consistently, and just make smart choices with your money.
It's about empowering yourself, basically.
Exactly. It's about taking charge of your finances.
I like the sound of that. So we've talked about aggressive saving, smart investing, but let's be honest. The word frugal, it gets thrown around a lot in the fire community. And to a lot of people, frugal just sounds like no fun at all.
Right, like you're just eating ramen noodles every night.
Exactly. So do you really have to give up everything you enjoy to achieve fire?
That's where I think people get FIRE all wrong. It's not about deprivation. It's really more about intentionality.
Okay, so what does that mean? Intentional with your money.
Yeah. Like one of the things we read was this forum thread, tons of stories from people who are actually living the whole FIRE lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them are saying that they actually spend more on things they love now than they did before.
Hold on, wait, really? How does that work? Because it seems like to retire early, you'd have to be spending less, right?
You would think so. But they're not just spending money on, like, whatever. They've cut out all the stuff they don't really care about.
Give me an example. Like
Well,
what?
like that latte you were talking about earlier. They've
Uh,
cut that out, but now they're taking the money they would have spent on that and using it on things they really enjoy,
yeah.
things that actually matter to them.
So it's not about never spending money. It's more about thinking about how you spend it.
Mhm.
And then like making sure it aligns with your values or whatever.
Exactly. And that's where the whole budgeting thing comes in.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Budgeting. I knew we'd get to that eventually.
Hmm.
But honestly, the word budget, it kind of stresses me out.
I hear you.
Eh,
But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. We're not talking about, like, those super restrictive budgets where you're tracking every single cent. It's more about just being mindful. Like, where is your money actually going?
So it's less about don't spend money and more about spend money on things you actually care about.
Right. And a lot of the people we read about, they were saying they use apps or spreadsheets to keep track of everything. That way they can see where they can cut back without, like, totally overhauling their lifestyle.
That's good. I like that. Okay, so let's say you've got the saving part down, you're budgeting like a pro, and you've even figured out the whole investing thing. What else do the FIRE people say is important?
One thing that came up a lot was this idea of diversifying your income.
Diversifying, like having multiple streams of income.
Yeah. So it's not just about cutting your spending. It's also about finding ways to bring in more money.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, the more money you're making, the faster you can reach your FIRE goals, but how do you actually do that? Diversify your income, I mean, especially if you're already working a full-time job.
There were a bunch of different ideas in the stuff we read. Some people were talking about side hustles like freelance writing or coaching.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those.
Others were talking about investing in rental properties or buying dividend stocks.
Ooh, dividend stocks. That's one of those things that I hear people talking about, but I'm always too embarrassed to admit I don't really know what it means. What are they?
So basically, they're shares of companies that pay you, the shareholder, a portion of their profits, usually every quarter.
So you basically get like a bonus just for owning a piece of the company.
Kinda. You're earning money on top of your investment without having to sell anything.
See, now that sounds appealing.
Right. It's great for people who are thinking long term, building wealth slowly over time.
But like with any investment, there's got to be some kind of catch, right?
Of course, you always want to do your research, make sure the companies you're investing in are, actually profitable.
So don't just blindly follow what everyone else is doing.
Exactly. And that brings us back to something we talked about earlier. FIRE is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
You got to pace yourself. You're not going to get there overnight.
Right. It takes patience.
Yeah.
And discipline. And you're going to have to keep learning and adapting along the way. And honestly, having a good support system can make a huge difference.
You mean like having people to talk to about all this stuff?
Exactly. Like that online
Mhm.
community we talked about earlier, or even just friends and family who are also interested in FIRE on.
Because let's be real, trying to figure all this out on your own, it can be pretty overwhelming.
Definitely. And, sometimes you just need to vent to someone who gets it, someone who understands the challenges and the rewards.
Yeah, it's like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
It's so true.
Having people to cheer you on, to offer advice when you need it, that can make all the difference.
And with FIRE, it's not just about the technical stuff. Like, yeah, you got to figure out the saving and the investing, but it's also about mindset.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about the mindset piece.
Well, one of the things we listened to was a podcast interview with a financial advisor. He made this really interesting point. He said, the real magic of FIRE, it's not actually about the money.
It's not.
Not really. He said it's about freedom.
Okay, so like freedom to do what? What does that even look like?
Well, he gave this example of a woman who quit her corporate job. She'd saved up a bunch of money, and she used it to start her own jewelry business.
So Fire Big gave her the freedom to like pursue her passion.
Exactly. It wasn't about never working again. It was about having choices.
I like that.
It's about realizing that wealth isn't just about how much money you have in the bank. It's about having options.
Yeah, it's about being able to design a life that you're actually excited to get up for every day.
Right. It's about having the freedom to spend your time doing things you love, whether that's traveling, pursuing a hobby, or just, hanging out with your family.
So as we're wrapping up here, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this whole conversation about fire?
That it's not just some far-off dream. It's actually achievable for anyone, as long as you're willing to put in the work.
And part of that work is, like we talked about, finding your people, educating yourself, and being patient.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your finances so you can create the life you want on your own terms.
Love it. All right, so I think it's time for our final provocative thought for our listeners.
Yeah.
Something to, ponder as they go about their day.
Imagine waking up every morning and not feeling that sense of dread. You know that feeling like, ugh, I have to go to work.
Ugh, don't even remind me.
But instead, imagine feeling excited about the day ahead
Hmm.
because you have the freedom to do whatever you want with your time.
That's the dream.
That's the power of fire. So the question is that a future you're willing to create for yourselves?
That's something for everyone to think about.
It really is.
Well, on that note, this has been an awesome conversation. We've covered so much ground today.
We really have.
We dove deep into what FIRE is all about, debunked some common myths, and even got into the nitty-gritty of saving, investing, and budgeting.
And we talked about the importance of community.
Yes, can't forget that. Because let's be real, this whole journey is a lot easier and a lot more fun when you have people to share it with.
Couldn't agree more.
So, to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of FIRE. We hope you learned a lot. And hey, maybe you even feel inspired to take a closer look at your own finances. Until next time.